Thank you. Hi there. I'm Paul Cantrell. I teach computer science here at Macalester, which raises an interesting question. Why? Why do I teach computer science at a liberal arts college? Well, the short answer to that question is that computer science is, or at least can be, more than just job training, and so should education. To help illustrate what I mean by that, I want to talk about a project that I wrote with my excellent colleagues at Bust Out Solutions for the Como Zoo and Conservatory. They wanted an interactive iPad exhibit to go with their bonsai tree exhibit that would let kids make their own virtual bonsai tree on an iPad, keep them busy for 5 minutes while their parents look at the trees, and hopefully maybe even educate and engage and inspire them, which gave us an interesting problem to solve. We had to create a tree in software. And I don't just mean a picture of a tree. We want you to be able to trim your own tree, your choices, your tree. That means we need an algorithm that makes things that look and feel like trees. The way we do that is using something called an L system. And the way it works is we start with just one segment. We're going to build tree out of these segments. We start with a segment, and we apply a rule to it. That's the rule at the lower left there. Take that segment and replace it with several segments. And then we take each of these several segments and apply the same rule to them, and apply the rule to each of these segments, and we get a structure, a plant-like structure that we can work with. Here's what that looks like on an iPad. This doesn't look like a tree yet, but we'll get there. The first thing we need to do to make it look like a bonsai is that bonsai trees start out dense and shrubby so that you have material to trim away. We need to make our tree look shrubby. The way I do that is at each step of the substitution, I remove a few segments. So instead of substitute, 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 it's now substitute, remove a few, substitute, remove a few. That kind of keeps it dense as it grows. Here's what it looks like. And it looks shrubby for sure, but it's like some kind of grassy tumbleweed maybe. We want something that looks like a woody tree. So how do we do that? How do we make it look like wood? Well, perhaps we might want to get an image of some bark, right? Something better than this generic brown. Maybe even the texture of the bark. But no, it turns out there's a much simpler and more effective way to make it look like a woody tree, which is that we take each of these segments that the tree is built out of, and we make them thicker depending on how many descendants they have up the tree, and we make them just slightly taller if they're closer to the root of the tree. And there we have something that actually I think looks like it's made out of wood, doesn't it? It's still just a bunch of cylinders stuck together. There's not a lot going on here. But what turned out to be a problem of shape and proportion might have seemed at first like a problem of color and texture. Something that happens when we write software, it asks us to look at things very closely. Software involves close seeing, and therefore software becomes a way of seeing. Like any creative endeavor, software is a way of seeing. The work we're doing right here, this is not scientific seeing. We're not forming a hypothesis about a tree. We're trying to do something artistic. The goal is not accuracy, it's to make something convincing. Now, there's a problem with this. It's a pretty serious one. You'll see it when I zoom in. The cylinders don't quite join up in some places. There are these visible seams between them because when you take a bunch of cylinders with their hard edges and you stick them together, sometimes there are little gaps. Well, one way to solve that might be to round off the ends, right? So let's see what that looks like. Oh, that's arguably even worse. To understand why this is so bad, we need to know a little bit about how computers do shading in 3D graphics. When you have a 3D model, you compute what's called the normals. These are just lines that stick straight out from the surface. Then you imagine light falling on the surface, and you say, well, if one of these normals is pointing straight at the light, then we should give it a little highlight. And if it's pointing more away from the light than not, then we should put it in shadow. That's how we do shading. The reason it looks so bad when we put two of these rounded ends next to each other is that when we do that, we end up with normals pointing very different directions right next to each other, which means that the light and the shadow make an abrupt transition. Now, we might fix this by trying to fill in those little gaps, but it turns out mathematically and programmatically, that's very difficult to do. And there's an easier, faster, better way, which is that we just take these normals and we lie. We straight up lie. We say, actually, it's always pointing straight off to the side, even when it isn't. That makes it so that when there's a join point between two of these rounded edges, there's not such an abrupt transition. And in fact, that fixes the problem. We've only changed the shading and not the shape. Seemed like it was a problem of shape. It's really a problem of light and dark and shading, which is the beautiful thing about software. We come up with ideas, notions, assumptions, hopes, wishes, and dreams. We encode them. We literally encode them. And then the computer throws them back at us with mindless literalism, and we see our own ideas, and our ideas talk back to us. Software makes our ideas talk back to us if we let it. Right now, we need people, desperately need people, who will listen to that, because software is doing a lot of things in our world. It's talking back to us in surprising ways, and we need to listen to that. Now, we throw a few leaves on that thing, and you get something that looks like a tree, right? It's pretty cool. And the beautiful thing about having an algorithm for this is that if we just change the art for the leaves and tweak a few parameters in the algorithm, we get not only an endless variety of maples, but also junipers, ficuses. The only difference between these three species of trees is a few numbers in an algorithm and different art for the leaves. What we're doing here, this is essentially art. We're making a tree, drawing a tree, but we're making it with algorithms. It's art, and the medium is algorithms. You can see why software companies put a huge premium on people who can cross boundaries and synthesize ideas from different fields. If we take a look at the finished app, here's somebody working on their tree. After a few minutes, they're perfecting their masterpiece. Here's math, software, art and graphic design, a smidge of botany, also psychology of the user, putting ourselves in the user's shoes, which is something that we get actually from reading literature. And there's also the many factors that went into this nonprofit, their mission, what do they want? All these different disciplines are coming together, just like we do in a liberal arts education like this one. Liberal arts is fantastic background for writing software, but that's not the question that I asked. We get confused about this so easily. We see that education is useful for jobs, and we say, well, it must be worthwhile. But that's not enough. That's not enough. I didn't ask, why is liberal arts education good for software? I asked, why does software belong in a liberal arts education? There was a moment in this project when somebody asked, how do we stop kids using this from taking their tree and just trimming it down to a stump? I said, what? You don't stop them? Were you never a child yourself? You walk up to this thing, you can trim the tree. What's the first thing you're gonna do? And it's true. Kid after kid, you watch them using this thing at the Como Zoo, they walk up to it and they trim it down to a stump and they say, ha, look what I did. And then you can see it hit them. They said, wait, nobody's policing me. I can trim my tree down to a stump if I want. This is my tree. And then it comes over them. They become absorbed, and they just lose themselves in that tree as they work on their personal masterpiece. Time after time, you can watch this happen. I walked in once and heard a kid say, Mommy, my tree is in the virtual collection. It happens to adults too, don't tell. And that moment of realizing that this is my tree and I'm free to make it what I want, that is what liberal arts education is about. Do any of you know what liberal arts actually means? I confess I didn't when I was a student. I knew that it didn't just mean politically liberal, something bigger than that. I thought it meant like liberal, maybe all-inclusive, something along those lines. In fact, no, the Latin phrase that liberal arts comes from, artes liberales, the liberalis here means of free people. This was the education centuries ago that free people received, as opposed to slaves. This was the education that gave people the power to determine their own lives' meaning and the ability to take responsibility for that power. This was the education that people deserved and needed who weren't completely defined as people by their economic value. Think about what it means that we think that liberal arts education is something narrow and specialized that only a few people need to bother with. Think about what that means. This is something that every human being should have. I don't mean that everyone should go to a 4-year private liberal arts college. I don't mean that this needs to happen in school at all. Education is much bigger than school, but this is something that every human being deserves. And I don't mean to shortchange job training. It's important, it's necessary, but it is not sufficient. We need education to be more than that. Yes, we should help students answer the question, how will I make money? But we should also help them answer the question, what should I do with that money when I have it? What do I value? What change do I want to create in the world? I can trim my life to a stump. So who do I want to be? And software can help answer these questions. It asks us to see closely. It makes our ideas talk back to us. It shows us that everything is connected to everything. Software is kind of an ideal liberal art. Probably any discipline can be. Liberal arts is not about what we teach, but about how we teach. That we teach with the belief that every human being deserves to be the author of their own life's meaning and needs to be able to take responsibility for that power. That's what liberal arts education is. Now, I don't know what software will look like in 20 or 40 years. Job training has kind of a short shelf life. But I do know that the things that my students learn from writing software will serve their unforeseeable lives in unforeseeable ways. And that is why I choose to spend my life teaching computer science at a liberal arts college.